So people wonder, how could the elect be deceived? We're going to see things we had not seen before, and we're going to see a lot of things that are going to look like Armageddon.
Hey, this is Unrefined Podcast. I'm Brandon Spain, your host, with co-host Lindsay Waters. Welcome to another episode. Hey, you guys, it's time for another show. Today we have with us Gary Wayne, scholar extraordinaire, author of The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Mankind, and soon part 2 of The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, which we're going to talk about later on more in the podcast because we want to dive into that and kind of get a sneak peek of what he's writing next. I just want to tell you, Gary, that this book is daunting. I'm still not finished with it, and I've been reading through it like really slowly and meditating on it. But I am the kind of goofy, nerdy guy though, that I don't like thin books. I love thick books. So I hope the second one is as thick as this one.
It is not quite as long. I promised all my people who have bought my books and who like what I write that it won't be as long as the first book. So it's only 84 chapters this time.
Oh, only 84. Wow. That's still exciting. I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I'm just that kind of guy. I always like thick books. So, but yeah, just to kind of start us out, I'd like to know, because our podcast, we're kind of trying to appeal to like newbies or people like we call them primers, people that are kind of new to a lot of this kind of stuff. And to kind of pull them in, we like to kind of give them the basics and then go into the deeper stuff. And we really, what Lindsay and I basically we've discussed, what we really want to talk about today is your eschatology. I heard you on Blurry Creatures, and you had said something that you had a document on eschatology and how that your eschatology was different than the average eschatologies, and that intrigued me because of all the different theological areas that I mean, I'm seminary trained, and all the different areas, they don't really go into eschatology as much in other than personal eschatology in seminary. So that intrigued me, and I'm like, Lindsay, I want to get Gary on the show, to talk about Genesis 6, but to see how it influences the eschatology and all that kind of stuff. But before we dive into that, will you tell us about your journey into the realm of the giants in Genesis 6? What got you started?
Certainly, I wasn't looking to do that. And I kind of backed my way into it. So, and I'm glad I did, but I didn't go there voluntarily. I was like kicking and screaming and saying, I don't want to do this. But so my my journey back to God started on a Friday evening with my brother and a friend having beers, and well into the night with lots of beers, somebody said, you know, how much courage do you have? And at that age, and I was like 20 or 21 years old. I said, I have lots of courage. Like, I'm up for any challenge. What do you have? And he said, well, if you got enough courage, there's a book we want you to read. And I had no idea what sort of book that they might be talking about. And then they started talking about Antichrist and false prophet. And I'm going, that's pretty weird stuff, guys. I said, I remember something about that before I was led away and from God, and when we were being raised in the church in our early life. I said, what's the name of this book that you're talking about? And it was a book I never heard of. It was called The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey, and it was written in the late 60s, early 70s. And so, yeah.
Yeah.
And I read pretty much everything he wrote after that because I was just fascinated with what he was talking about. But he scared the socks off of me with The Late Great. And so I'm a Christian contrarian, and I was a contrarian before I became a Christian contrarian. So I want to verify everything that I can. So if somebody writes something, I want to, can that be verified? And if somebody says something, I need to verify that. So I wanted to verify whether or not he was manipulating scripture and or just looking to sell books or whatever the motivation might be. I mean, my gut feeling was he was telling the truth, but I needed to go a little bit deeper. So the only way I could do that was I looked up the passages in the Bible, and then I thought, okay, they're there, they're applied accurately, but that doesn't mean that it's not out of context, and it's just designed for a preconceived conclusion for whatever agenda that might be underlying things. Because, as I say, I'm a contrarian. I need things verified. So the only way I could do that was to read the Bible and to see whether or not he was doing things in context. So I read the Bible, and then I realized I need to verify all the different prophecy lines, because this is just it's a spectacularly big book and takes almost forever to read, when at least it seemed that way at that age. So I started to log the prophecy narratives, and I got very quickly in, and I ran out of highlighter ink. So then I needed a new system. So I started all over, and I decided I would do files. And so then I had to add more files because there's way more prophecy narratives than I had anticipated. But along the way of doing that, and when I got to the New Testament, that's when I started to read Jesus's words, and it was just so preternatural. It just could not be a human speaking, and it just grabbed onto me at that point in time. And then the second thing is when I got to Genesis 6, I read about these giants, and I'm going, I have no idea what that is. That's not what I'm here to do. I want nothing to do with that. And so I just skipped over it. But as you log so many things through the Bible, I wasn't going to deal with something that's crazy as giants. More giants show up. And you've got the angelic realm that you have to be dealing with. And then there's the demons. And it's like, I need to pay attention. And so when I got logging through the whole Bible, then I realized I need to double check that I've got most of the stuff that's here. So then I went through and I did it again. And as I did that, I logged all the different things that I thought were giants. And I didn't get it all the first time for the giants, but I logged it down, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it. But I thought there's too much references to these kinds of peoples, and so I need to have this in a file for whatever reasons. And I didn't know what the reason was. So after I'd done all of this, and then I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to put into about 3 different sets of binders the different prophecy narratives. So I can lay it out for myself, try and put it into some sort of order. It's not for publication, just for my own benefit, to get a better handle on things. And so I did that. And then I thought, I want to see what other people might have to say about prophecy. And I started getting all of these different fancy names and things like that for the different types of eschatology. And I'm going, how can they all be right? Well, they can't be, because they have some distinct differences on things, not about, your faith in God, but in terms of the chronology of how end time prophecy is fulfilled and what certain things mean.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, that's really odd, but you know what? I like what Hal Lindsey says, but there's a few things in there that I'm not all that comfortable. It doesn't really line up for me, but I'm not ready to really sort of deal with that sort of aspect about it. But I started to get a better grasp on things when I thought I need to resolve this in my own mind. So and I won't go into my prophecy approach, but once I had that sort of kind of almost like an epiphany, it just became kind of quite clear on the way through. So then I was able to organize things in an organized manner, and I found things were able to fit very easily. So I have all this information, and I thought, well, I got about 12 or 15 books I could write here, maybe more.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
I never went to university. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a minister. I don't believe I'm a prophet. And just check off that whole list. All I am is the average person who's got an enormous curiosity, who had a obsession when I was young with history and prehistory, and became obsessed with prophecy, and then how that sort of linked together. So I thought I would write a short book. I thought, let's see whether I can write a short book, see whether or not it makes sense to me, whether or not A publisher might think it would be worthy to publish. Would it sell? And would people like it? And so I wrote the first 10 chapters very easily, and I decided to write about the flood and the giants because I thought this would just be fun. I'll learn more about it as I do, and I wrote the first 10 chapters. But then what kicked in was my other passions. And I understood that what was written in the Bible in prehistory and then the prehistory shortly after the flood is the same things that are written about in all cultures around the earth. The difference being is those what people call today in North America, what other people from those countries would call their history, though what we call them over here is legend or mythology. They were telling the same story, but through a polytheist lens.
Yeah.
And I thought Christians might enjoy seeing that biases, but understand that it's just talking about the same types of events, but through their own culture and their own religion. And so I thought I could probably mix that in. So I started to mix in Sumerian, Greek mythology. And then I thought, well, I can't really do that for people if they don't understand the culture and the context. And the context and the culture comes from their polytheist religion. Well, then I had to go in and I had to research all the different religions. And then I realized that through the mystery schools that come out of the religions, that's what was taught within the elite that developed the whole culture. And that led me to the secret societies and seven sacred sciences that they developed that merged with the fallen angels or the gods in the polytheist belief system. And all of a sudden, my book was growing. And then I realized I don't know anything about secret societies. So now I got to learn about secret societies. So after reading all of those different religious texts around the world, putting it in the book, then I had to learn about secret societies. I was down that rabbit hole for almost 10 years. And it's endless.
Wow.
It's just tentacles that go absolutely everywhere with the size of the organization and all the different groups and all the different things that they do. It's all it I thought I was crazy for a while because I thought nobody would believe this, and so I stopped many times. And but there's always this sort of calling to come back and to finish, and I wouldn't have peace unless I did that. And so when I got back into it, things sort of, you know, started to make sense with me and my life again, and so I finished the book. So that's how I got into the giants. And it's a very, very large topic, but I had no intentions of doing that. I wanted to write prophecy books. And so, but it started to lay the foundation for me that I needed to, understand prehistory to understand prophecy.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I was going to ask you, and you took this wonderful scenic route to answering it. Just the importance of prehistory to end times.
Yeah, it is. It all the context is there. I look at the creation of the Adamites as the resolution to the angelic rebellion, and everything that the angels did to humankind after the creation of the Adamites is to prevent humankind to being raised up like angels in the future time and to justify their rebellion. And so it's intricately interwoven. So if the Adamites are the resolution to the end time, everything that's written about the end time has its context in prehistory and the prophets that provided mysterious allegories and things to prehistory, so to speak.
Okay, so here's a question. You talked about the Adamites, and I've listened to some of your other podcasts. If I'm correct, you hold to a pre-Adamite man view as well, don't you? And could you go into that a little bit for us?
Yeah, it's a good question. And if people out there that are listening are intrigued about what I'm about to say, I have several documents on this that you get a hold of me through my email address or the website where it says contact the author, and that's the Genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com, that I walk through it biblically. So one of the things that my principles in that I use to understand the Bible and to prophecy in my approach is that I don't believe the Bible is in contradiction. I believe that the Bible adds additional information as it unfolds, as part of its sort of MO, but that information never contradicts itself with passages that are written before. So it's a tough standard. So if I look at the Genesis 2 creation account with the day 6 creation account, I can't reconcile it. I can't reconcile it as just additional information because there's a complete different order of creation there. And you have different things going on. You have creation being done in male and female and multiple and being said to, populate the earth. Well, Adam was created in singular. Sometime later, and we're not told how long later, a partner is being searched for Adam. And if there's nobody else, what kind of partner are they looking for for Adam? Unless it's amongst another population. But because one presumes it's not the serpent race, that one presumes that Nahash may have been part of the days 4 through 6 creation, separate from the humans. And then if it's not them, it's either an animal or other people that aren't talked about. But Eve is created separately and differently.
Well, and too, Gary, it's like we can't, and I've heard it said a lot of times, we can't just take chapter 2 and make it a literary device like a lot of people want to do, and it's narrative and then a literary device and then narrative. That doesn't make sense in the tone of the scripture, the whole Genesis thing. I don't know if you've ever heard that before. And so I agree with you. It doesn't make sense as anything other than narrative. So, yeah. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just.
Oh, no problem. And you have Elohim that's used in Genesis 1. And then up to verse 4 in Genesis 2, you have Elohim, which is God, as it's translated in the King James Version Bible. And then you have Lord God that's introduced, Jehovah of the Elohim. So something different is also going on. It's like a great commission. And then you have the breathing of the Spirit, all of which isn't described in day 6. And so there's something seemingly more going on with Adam. And I think when we look at when does Eden happen, we have no idea when Eden would happen if Genesis is written in a linear manner. And I think it is. I mean, it just lays everything out sort of in order. And I think the whole Bible is linear, and where you have books like the prophets, for example, you get the markers where it fits into that chronology, and you get the same thing going on in the book of Revelation. So I think the Bible begins in Genesis and it ends in Revelation, and you just need to sort of relax and sort of let that sort of read. But it's the different details that don't apply. And Adam is put in Eden, and the people are to multiply around the earth. And he's got this huge place and facility all by himself. It goes from the Nile to the Euphrates. I mean, all of this information is not in Genesis 1 and is in conflict. And the people are told that they can eat any tree in the world that they want, but not Adam. And there's that implied law. And before Adam, the law was imputed, as we're told in the New Testament. So, and then you get this issue that with Cain as to who does he meet in Nod, and why is their place named Nod? Now you could say, well, authors it's name that they named later. That's fine. But he met a wife. Where does the wife come from? He built a city. Why did he need a city if he was the only one? Who did he need protection from? A lot of people might say, well, it was one of his sisters or descendants. Well, that's not really how the chronology sort of lays it out. At that time, there's nobody. But if you wanted to get into chronology, Seth isn't born until Adam is 130 years old, and Cain and Abel, they're like at the beginning of their adulthood with their first sacrifices. That I think Cain doesn't provide the first fruits, which is his big mistake compared to what Abel did. And so there's a gap there where there's no female. And then we're only told sometime after Seth that sons and daughters are born by Adam and Eve. And in Deuteronomy 32, we're actually told there'll be 70 sons for the 70 nations. And people will say, well, Eden is day 8, except that, well, it doesn't say day 8. It doesn't say when Eden happens. So you got all of these sort of things hanging out, and it just doesn't fit like a glove what it needs to be. So I think the way that it works is that there's a separate creation, because after day 6, I think the rebellious angels actually lead the people astray. And within Eden, there's a new set of uncorruptive animals that need to be named because of the complete corruption, or the Hebrew word shakath, that's going on in the world, that gets to an absolute peak, if you want, at the time of the flood, and after other corruptions that are going to take place of the earth. So, and that includes the plant genome, all of the animal genome at that time as well, except for, I think, the animals that God saves and names and calls to the ark. So I know that's a long story, and there's way more detail than I provided, but it's just those kinds of things in terms of how I stick to my view of the Bible and how I stick to prophecy. So it's one of those principles of prophecy as well. You can't have conflicts in prophecy.
Well, and two, it also ties in, Gary. Correct me if I'm wrong. It kind of parallels the story of Abraham. God always starts with one man to create a people, and you had Adam and then Abraham, and he pulls them out from other people, so to speak.
Yes.
And so,
And
with what you're
with
saying,
Noah as well.
yeah, and Noah as well, exactly. And so you're seeing the ways of God in that, and that makes more that's more of a coherent understanding of the narratives in the first few chapters of Genesis, at least in my opinion. I think it's that makes things make more sense to me. I mean, I know it's not good grammar, but it makes things make a lot more sense. And
Yeah, and it
so
sort of helps answer where the 4 races come from.
all right,
So
well,
if you,
tell us
yeah,
about
because you
that.
have well, we, after the flood, is basically where we get most of our information from. The rest is kind of murky in the prehistory part. But visually, and what we've known throughout history, you basically have the 4 races that, populated after Babel. So if there's just Noah and his wife, that would be of the same lineage of the Sethites, and his sons, and then 3 wives of the sons. And if they're all Sethites, then where do the 4 races come after the flood? Either they survived the flood, which I suppose would be possible, but I'm a proponent of only 8 humans survived. And so the only way that
Yeah,
that could happen is that people who weren't corrupted from the day 6 line um, were were the wives. So you could have had 3 races created on day 1, or you could have 4 races, and an Adam would have been, as the same word for man that is used and male in Genesis 1 as Adam, would have been the same species and maybe one of those races. And maybe even his wife, which is unnamed, may have been from the Sethite line. But perhaps then, if you're accounting for the races, and this is my speculation on how we account for things, is you could have had wives that were spiritually clean and probably physically clean and uncorrupted, that were the sons' wives, and now you have the 4 races after the flood.
that makes sense. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. I don't know where this actually fits in the whole biblical narrative or anything. Do you believe that before the flood there was one continent, like a Pangea type thing, and then the flood caused a disbursement of that continent, or was it like it is today before the flood?
Well, it's certainly possible that there was one continent, and people
Is that an
who are
evolutionary thing? Is that an
it
evolutionary?
well, I was just going to say that people from a biblical perspective would look at that. It would be in the generation of Babel, where you have a dividing of the people and a dividing of the continents. As it's a tough case to
Peleg.
make that way. Yeah,
I thought
with
about
Peleg. Yeah,
Peleg. He
yeah,
was
that's exactly
says he
who I
was
was
born when the
referencing.
earth was divided, and I guess that
Yeah,
could just mean Babel, but it could also mean the
the
literal
continents.
continents,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you
or
could
both.
interpret that way. Um, for me, I don't need to have that as a splitting of the continents then. But it would make
Yeah.
sense that before the flood, that, even from a polytheist perspective, which is again, as I talked about, they're talking about the same set of events through a polytheist lens. And you get this great story that's written by Rosicrucians like Tolkien, who write Lord of the Rings and Middle Earth as sort of one big continent, right? So even in their prehistory, Middle Earth, which is the earth that rises up and dries up after chaos is taken away, and what they're talking about with that is the separation of the waters above with the waters below. So they're telling the same type of story, but through a polytheist lens. And in those recollections, not all, but in a lot of those recollections, you have sort of one continent. But in other recollections from polytheist prehistory, you have all of the oceans in place. So that would suggest that the continents had divided, and the names of the oceans were, whether they're known by the names today or not, were there as well. And great civilizations, more than just Sumer, more than just antediluvian Egypt, more than just antediluvian Greece, were there. Some people say 4 civilizations, some people say 7, some write 9, some 11. So I think the most consistent one is 4 or 7 for civilizations, and some of those civilizations were pretty far spread. But that would make sense on the populations being told to spread out through the whole earth in day 1 or day 6 from Genesis 1, that the continents may have been split by then already. But as was mentioned with Peleg, I'm open to the fact that there could have been that drifting or a supernatural intervention to help ensure that the post-Diluvian epoch is going to play out, so that all the Gentiles would be fulfilled and all the names destined in that period of time to whose names are written in the book of life have the opportunity to come into the earth and leave their name in or have it blotted out through free choice.
Yeah. And so this is where like the Atlantean story comes into play, like one of the 4 civilizations, right? Atlantis. What are the other 3, Gary, that they say?
Well, Sumer is one, and probably likely the area where Cain was, and I also think that you have a civilization that is in below Mount Hermon. And some people would equate that with Mesopotamia, perhaps, and Mount Hermon region is prevalent in Sumerian and Middle East prehistory as well, and that Eden would be somewhere in that area as well. But that Cain went east into Nod, so east of Eden. So I think there's a civilization where the Sethites were, and that are very closely associated with the Mesopotamian. So once you get to the beyond Egypt, Greece, and Sumer, and whether or not that's all part of that one civilization, that would only leave one other one. That typically would be understood as Mu. And I make a distinction here because Atlantis is another island sort of continent. So, but that's kind of understood in the context of the 4 as being part of the Greek civilization. Mu would be more closely related to subcontinent of India, somewhere in the India
Asia.
Ocean or a little bit further south into Asia. Yeah. And that people from the Atlantean civilization and Mu would have settled areas that we would know today as North America and South America. That sort of indicates maybe a continental slip, but maybe it was just at that time, if it was one continent, to the outer reaches of the land. So the Atlantis story is probably the most common and popular story in the modern mythos of prehistory. And it's interesting that you have, this ruling council of gods that is talked about in Psalms 82. This would be the antediluvian council of the gods ruling over the 70 nations, as counted by the sons of Adam in Deuteronomy 32. And that Poseidon is part of this council of gods and one of the major gods, one of the 12 Olympians. And he intermarries with a human female, and her name is Clyto. And they produce 12 giant Nephilim hero kings. Atlas is the most famous, and he's called both a titan and a hero and a demigod as the third. And so Titan can mean of heaven and it can mean of earth. So just as you have the Anunnaki watchers of heaven, the Anunnaki demigod watchers of the earth, this is a standard sort of understanding around the polytheist world. And even within the Bible, some people can look at the Nephilim, which is the word for giant in Genesis 6:4 and Numbers 13:33. Shows up 3 times in the Old Testament. Shows up more translated as giant, but a different word. Words, because there's a Gibberim word that's translated into giant from the book of Job. But you have this root word for Nephilim, and Nephilim means giant or giant tribe and tyrants and bullies and descriptions of these giants. You have this word Nephal is in the plural. Nephil would be the giants singular. I am is the male plural, as you get with cherubim or seraphim and Gibberim and all of those words. It's a plural, and it's kind of almost like French, where you have male and female as sort of part of the language, right, in terms of how things are split up. And so you have this word Nephal, which are the Nephilim. Nephal means fall. So if you call these ones I am as in ones as in plural, like the seraphim or the 6-winged serpent-faced ones, or the Nephilim are the giant ones or the terrible ones, and you have the Nephilim as the fallen ones, because it means fallen or to prostrate oneself down on the ground. And so when we look at fallen angels, that's such a interesting connection to the fallen angels, just as when you see the word Satan fall from heaven in the book of Isaiah, for example, that's the word Nephal as well. So you have these connections as the Nephilim of the heavenly ones, the Shamayim. And so Shama being singular, which never shows up in the Bible, it's always Shamayim as the plural. So you have, what I'm saying there is, in this long sort of rabbit trail, is you have the Nephilim of heaven and the Nephilim of earth. So you can make a connection that's a kind of a constant, again, seen through a post-Diluvian through a monotheistic or polytheistic lens. So the Atlantis story is the same story as being talked about in Genesis 6:1-4. And that it is in the preamble to the flood story as the context to the flood story. And for the consequence of the earth having violence and corruption to such an extent that you're going to have the flood. And the same thing happens in the Atlantean story, where you have these 12 kings that are trying to take over the world with their violence and impose their universal religion that I call in the Genesis 6 conspiracy part 1, Enochian mysticism, Enoch son of Cain versus Enoch son of Jared. 2 Enochs, if people aren't aware of it, and it's an important thing to remember. That it is telling the same story, but through a polytheist lens that Genesis 6 is talking about, and this is a constant throughout polytheism.
Wow. That's fascinating. Hey, my unrefined friends. I just want to tell you guys that I am so thankful that you are my life. Some of our best fans have been writing to us, and I just so encouraged about how lives are being transformed and people are getting something out of this podcast. I mean, that's what it's all about. That's why we're doing this, is to glorify Jesus and to just look at the world and have a more open view of the seen and the unseen and the supernatural in the world. So while we're doing that, we're going to handle all different kinds of topics. But see, what I'd like for you to be involved in or part of is our members only group. things that are coming in our members only group that are going to just blow your mind. Not to mention, there's going to be episodes in there that you won't be able to hear just on the normal episode channel. So make sure to visit our website at unrefinedpodcast.com and check out our members only community. I just can't stress the fact that, we're after building a community, and there's so much out there, you guys, and there's so much coming. I really believe we need to build these strong communities of Christ followers to be able to handle what might be coming in the future days. We're sure that you'd be a good fit, and we cannot wait. I can't wait to see you there.
The one that people use most commonly as to discredit the Bible would be the Epic of Gilgamesh, where you have Utnapishtim as the Sumerian Noah. Other translations would be Ziusudra, but same character, same story. And he's in an ark, different details on the macro level than on the micro level as to what's in the Noah story, but on the macro level, talking about the flood story. And his whole family are on an ark. Thing is not only is Utnapishtim, his family, Gilgamesh, and Enkidu demigods. It's a story of giant survival or giant creation, with Gilgamesh being born after the flood as the offspring of the goddess Nin, and Lugalbanda, king of Uruk, which would have been either another giant or a human, to create Gilgamesh. And they are all classified as 2/3 god and 1/3 human. And even the Greek story with Deucalion and Pyrrha, they say that that's the human survival story. Well, it's either a copy or a different accounting from polytheism for how giants show up the flood, or there's actually giants who did survive the flood. And Deucalion is the son of Prometheus. So either way, he's either either Prometheus is either a giant or a god. So you're talking about a giant survival story. It doesn't matter how you sort of slice it. So, and again, that's constant. And throughout the world, you get human survival stories on an ark and giant ones, and they're told a little bit differently, but about the same event.
Wow, that's fascinating. Well, I was going to ask you earlier, and this is its own topic, but a little bit of a rabbit trail. Do you think that when David talks about his mighty men, is there a correlation between those mighty men of renown versus the mighty men of renown that it talks about in Genesis 6? Did I guess I'll just spit it right out. Did David have giants among his mighty men that did these exploits with him?
We have to make some distinctions. So it's an excellent question. So Gibborim, or the singular Gibbor, as mighty one, shows up in Genesis 6:4, describes the Nephilim. And it's used 158 times, 155 times in the Old Testament in Hebrew. But it doesn't always mean a giant. And so sometimes it's just used as an expression of strength and power. Sometimes angels, as when it says that they excel, that goes back to the Hebrew Gibor. Sometimes it's the strength and power of God that's being described. So you have to look at the context at how it's being described. And sometimes there's a feminine aspect, as in the application of that power, which is 1369, which follows 1368 Gibor, and that's Gibberah, with the AH as the female plural suffix. And it's used, again, for the application, just as you would have, Shakam or Shaka as the male and female version of wisdom being used. So you have to make a distinction that it may not be referring to a female, but just the action of that word as it's sort of applied in Hebrew, as I would understand it. And there's other examples, but just to sort of lay that down as an example. So when we're reading the context of Mighty One in the Old Testament, we have to understand when it goes back to Gibberin, is it defined as a giant or not? So when it's used for, let's say, Nimrod, he's the son of Cush. So either Cush married a fallen angel, which we're not told that happened, and we're not told who the mother is, but he's classified as becoming a Gibberim or a Mighty One. So, but he's got a human father. So it's unlikely that he was, but he portrayed and acted, I think, like a Gibberim. Now, with David's Mighty Men, you have that word Gibor again. And so it could be just being brave warriors is likely application, because most of the Israelites are the mighty men. But there's a few exceptions in there that now you can sort of say, okay, the Israelites weren't Rephaim, as the giants would be known after the flood. Rapha being the singular, Rephaim being the plural. And Rephaim does show up twice in the Bible, translated as Rephaim, once in Genesis 14 in the War of Giants, and once in Genesis 15 amongst the land that is being promised to Abraham from the Nile to the Euphrates. So I don't know why they didn't translate it Rephaim all the way through, but they didn't. They confused and conflated the word giant, at least in the King James Version Bible. And so when we look at Uriah the Hittite, Hittites, and I walk through this in detail in my second book, would be part of what I call the hybrid giants after the flood. So the Rephaim are post-diluvian giants, Nephilim are antediluvian giants. And so the only time that Nephilim shows up after the flood is twice in Numbers 13:33, where it says, Anak were the children of giants. Now, in the accurate part of the report, because that's the embellished evil part of the report, Joshua and Caleb did describe the Anakim kings that they saw. And they also described people that were taller than them, as confirmed in Deuteronomy 1. And that the Anakim kings were Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. And they lived in Hebron, Kiriath Arba. Arba is the father, the patriarch of the Anak, and he is not in the Table of Nations because you don't have any Rephaim in the Table of Nations. And so Rephaim is the word that's used to describe the Anak or the Anakim in Deuteronomy 2, where that word goes back to the Hebrew word Rapha. So the embellished part of the report was to terrify the Israelites, because they understood the veracity of the Nephilim and that they were even bigger before the flood. So they didn't call them Nephilim, or didn't call them Rephaim, they called them Nephilim to terrify the people so that they wouldn't have to go in and fight these monsters. And so into that sort of mix then, you have the word Hittite, which is Heth from the Canaanite line, and Sidon, which would be his brother, and Canaan the father. But after that, you have the 9 patriarchless tribes. There are no other patriarchless tribes in the Table of Nations in Genesis 10 or First Chronicles. And so, and as I walk through in the new book, that these have a patriarch, but it's a Rephaim patriarch, which is why they're not listed in the Table of Nations, as Rapha is not listed and as Anak is not listed, and other ones that I'll name in the book in part 2. So these are 7 to 9 feet tall because they're hybrid humans and Rephaim. So the daughters of Canaan married with the Rephaim patriarchs to create the patriarchless nations like the Amorites, the Jebusites, the Hivites, and all 9 that are sort of mysteriously put there as a family of the Canaanites, which can be translated not only as family, but a different species or a different kind. So when we go back to Uriah the Hittite, he's likely a hybrid warrior. And that the Hittites, as with the Canaanites, as with the Sidonites, also intermarried with giants. Whether or not Canaan did that, whether or not Sidon did, whether or not Heth did, or some of their daughters intermarried with the Rephaim too, but because they're descended from Noahite patriarchs, they received the patriarchal or eponymously named tribe, even though they would be hybrids, whereas the other ones would be eponymously named after their patriarch.
Hmm.
There's also
Wow.
Makathites, which would be
Yeah.
considered a tribe of giants, as I covered as well. There's one Makathite in there. So there's a few ones that could be considered giants that are in the mighty ones fighting with David. And it's not unusual for David to have these kinds of giants fighting with him. This is early on, but later on, he's got the Pelathim and the Cherathim, which are part of the migration of the Philistines and aboriginals from the island of Crete that the Philistines intermarried with. And in the second book, I make the case that they're giants as well, and the Philistines are the hybrids.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard that. I think I've seen that somewhere before. I mean, well, look, that's where the brothers of Gath. I mean, Goliath and all his brothers came from, right? It's from that Cretan line.
Yes. Well, and the one who succeeds Goliath as king of Gath is Ashish. And ACH is part of the Achaemenid patronymic titles that go along with it. He's also called Abi Melech, which is also a Philistine title that was in the time of Abraham as well for a patronymic king title. But Ashish is his name, and that means Greek, and Ish is a champion or a warrior. And he's the one who replaces Goliath as king of Gath, and David takes 5 smooth stones, right? So he's prepared to kill all 5 giant kings or all 4 other brothers of Goliath of that time, because the giant that was Goliath's father bore 4 other giants. Some people might say 6, but whatever it is, 4, 5, or 6. He was prepared to, with the 5 smooth stones, to kill all those giants that day if he had to.
Hmm. So there were 5 lords of the Philistines. Was each one of
Yes.
them kind of a? Yeah, I just thought of
Yeah.
that for some reason.
Yeah, you have the princes and the kings of the Philistines who are appointed. So there's 2 different terms. There's the princes of the Philistines and the lords of the Philistine.
Okay.
Princes of the Philistines are sort of the senior order, and they nominate each of those kings for that Philistine pentapolis. And when we look at how that whole society was set up, it's set up on a sort of military sort of network. And the word Sar and Sarim, which is used for the Saranum as it's transliterated for these kings and these princes, is sort of a word that goes back to tyrant and tyros and into a German etymology, again named after giants from the Greek sort of area. So it's important to understand there's that side of this mixture of the Philistine Confederacy, and that when the Philistines carved out Gaza from the Avim, not all the Avim were destroyed. They actually maintained one of the cities, and the Anakim remained in 2 of the 2 cities, and Gath was one of the cities of the Anakim. So you have this mixture of all of these different giants. So not all the Anakim were driven out, not all the Avim were driven out, and then you have these migrating giants and hybrids from Crete that becomes the new Philistine Confederacy, as what I would call as a larger part of the southern alliance of giants, which included the Horim and the Amalekim and a few other giant tribes.
Hmm. All right, so let's kind of I want to shift gears a little bit here, if it's all right with you, Gary, and let's delve a little bit into the eschatology aspect of this, because that's what really fascinated me about your views. You drew me in when you basically said that you had distinctive aspects, which I can see by the method that you researched over the years. You didn't go into it with presuppositions of I have to fit these certain molds, and and so what are some of the distinctives of the eschatology that you've come up with relating to the Genesis 6 than the usual views that we have?
Yeah. So one of the things I mentioned earlier is that um, to understand prehistory, I mean, to understand prophecy, you need to understand prehistory. So if you want to know the
Yes.
larger meaning to Babylon, or who the mighty kings are in the New Testament, the Megastanes and Magos of as they're being described, and these are kings. You need to understand the bloodlines of the giants and the whole sort of hierarchy that rules this world, as we're told about in the New Testament by uh, it's governed over by Satan and then his council of gods underneath him. So that's one of the things that is part of my approach. And the other thing we
Yeah.
mentioned about is I read the Bible literally.
Yes.
Um, and that the Bible is linear. So those are all part of it, and that even Revelation is linear, and it's got markers in there for it. I define allegories from within the Bible, not outside the Bible. Now, where polytheism
Mm.
can add context and more information about what the Bible references, I may reference that, but I base and measure everything outside the Bible against what's inside the Bible. And that I one of the things I try and do, because what I noticed in a lot of the preconceived approaches is that um, the cases are made and they leave out inconvenient passages. So I
Yeah.
believe
Yeah.
that all the relevant passages have to be included and they have to fit. And you just can't
Yes.
leave out the ones that don't fit your preconceived conclusion. Um, but the most important thing that I do is I put everything around what Jesus said versus put Jesus around what all the prophets said. Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. He is the word of God. He is the Jehovah of
Mm.
the Elohim. The whole Old Testament and the New Testament is all about him. And that we should not apologize for what Jesus said. We should not reimagine what Jesus said. And we should not ignore what Jesus said. We should put all prophecy around what he said. And when you start to do that, it makes sense. And so some of the people might say, well, Jesus didn't put things in a chronological order, he put them in a topical order. Fair ball, it sounds like an easy way to sort of dismiss what he says so you can start fitting in things the way that you want them to fit in. But the language doesn't really sort of stand up to that. So in the books of Matthew, Luke, and Mark, you have this word then that is put in after the events, and then this happens, and then this happens, right? And that word's not
Mm-hmm.
inserted by the translators. It actually has a Greek word, and that's the Greek word toda. And it means then, at that time, after that. So he's using very specific words in his end time oration to the disciples as to what will be the major assignment, what would be the major signs of your coming, how will the end time come about, and he's giving them the chronological order. And you have that word toda is not just used once, it's used in Matthew 24, 9, 10, 14, 16, 21, 23, 40, Mark 13, 14, 21, 26, 27. I won't go through all the Luke ones, but you get the picture that
Yeah.
the same word is being used all of the time, and there's a chronology. And then he goes and he puts the abomination in the middle of his signs of his coming. Not just saying when I'm going to come and then nothing after as the signs of his coming. He puts it in the middle of his coming. And then he says to reference the book of Daniel for the abomination. And that gives you the timing at the midpoint. And so everything, once you start to put all the verses around what he said, it starts to take away all of the contradictions. So all of the book of Daniel flows, the book of Revelation flows. And when you overlay 2 Thessalonians 2 on top of what Jesus said, it flows perfectly. You can overlay anything any of the prophets said onto what Jesus said, and it'll fit. It's just sort of just that simple. And one of the other things, as you've probably heard, that I like to do is, and this is just sort of for my own benefit, because it gives you more context, I think, is I like to take the words back to after I've used several translations to sort of triangulate how it's understood in English, because it's not always translated the same way, different passages. And then I take those words
Right.
back on the key passages back to the Hebrew, original Hebrew, and the original Greek. And you find in both of those languages, you have several different meanings, a lot that are sort of nuanced as part of the same meaning, and then some of them that are completely different. So you have to select the right meanings for that Hebrew word translation or that Greek word translation, and it just sort of reflects a little bit more about the context. And that's what I really found is, and you can do that sort of selectively with a concordance, but don't select a meaning that doesn't fit the sentence. Don't select a meaning that doesn't fit the chapter or the verse that it's in. Don't select a meaning that would contradict anything else in the Bible that's written about that topic. It's got to fit perfectly. And a lot of people will try and manipulate those meanings. And I try and be, and I recommend that you have to be disciplined if you really want to get sort of a full understanding. And then another thing I do that's a little bit different, not with everybody, but with some, is Old Testament prophecies that are applied to Israel, I apply to Israel. If they're applied to Judah, I apply them to Judah. One's the southern kingdom, one's the lost tribes of the north, and they have separate prophecies that will bring them back together in the end time, but you have to apply them differently. If it's applied to a specific tribe of Israel, like Ephraim or Manasseh or Dan, those are again apply to those specific people, and do not conflate them with church prophecies. We get a lot of prophecy in the New Testament that applies to the church,
Hmm.
but just don't overlay what was guaranteed to Israel and Judah in the Holy Covenant, in including the reconciliation in the second Exodus that happens in the last 3.5 years.
Yeah. No, that's so simple. I mean, and that's how it should be laid out. I kind of have this image of you like laying on different layers on top. I remember how they used to make maps a long time ago in the encyclopedias, which dates me anyway, and how you would have one map would go down and then the other map would go down on top of it and include more of the map and then the other map,
Yep.
and that's how I see you doing prophecy, which makes
Yes.
perfect sense. All these
Yep.
layers come down, and all together they make a picture that is more coherent. Is that a
Yeah,
proper?
it
Would that
does.
be a good? Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. And I don't have to worry about if I come across a verse I missed, it'll slide in, because it should. It needs to. It's
right.
the word of God. So, there's some approaches that say that we've already had the first 3.5 years of the last seven.
Yeah,
And it's very interesting, sort of philosophical kind of argument, except that it leaves out parts of prophecy. And so I'm wondering how that sort of really works if you want to include the whole Bible. Um, and they say, well, there's already been an abomination. There's been the first 3.5 years. I'm going, well, let me see. So in Daniel 9:27, it says there's 1 week that's separated for all of prophecy, all of vision, everything to be completed, including the introduction of Jesus. And now you're going to slice that in half, that it wasn't all 1 week at a time that it says. And then you're going to actually contradict that by saying, because what they tend to do then, they start to leave out the New Testament prophecies, but it still conflicts with what Daniel says. And I'm going, so if this has happened, that after the destruction of Jerusalem, then how is it that In Daniel, let's say Daniel 11, 21 to 22 to about 30 describes the rise of Antichrist in the first 3.5 years after negotiating the covenant in 927. And then comes the abomination. We haven't seen that rise. And we haven't seen in Daniel 2 with the metallic empires or Daniel 7 with the beast empires the rise of that end time empire of 10 kings that is going to rule with Babylon in the first 3.5 years. But they don't like to use the New Testament prophecies.
Mm. So Gary,
because then you got to leave out a lot of Revelation then as well by leaving out the New Testament prophecies.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Do I understand that you kind of hold to that God pressing the pause button view of the 70 weeks, the gap kind of theory?
Yes. Yeah, I do.
Okay.
And because before in Daniel 11, you get what happens, after the fall of Jerusalem, right? And then it jumps into the end time, starting in verse 21 with the Antichrist, which appears in Daniel 9, and we're told will come up amongst that last empire as a horn in Daniel 7, and also as it sort of matches up with the book of Revelations, but sticking with Daniel 7. But Daniel 8 in another prophecy talks about the same type of events with the same type of language, but just talking about the Greek Empire.
Yeah, it's always been a confusing passage to me, I'll be honest. I've never been able to make much sense of it.
Daniel 11? Or
well, just the 70 weeks passage. I can't even remember what chapter it is.
Yeah, it's Daniel 9.
Yeah, Daniel 9, yeah.
Yeah, and before the 7-year covenant that's negotiated. So what it says in Daniel 9:26 that in the time of the end, or that the end time, which is the Hebrew word ketz, actually means the end days. And then you get into Daniel 9:27. So you get the context for the time that week's been sliced out for. And it's the last 7 years because everything's going to be fulfilled. So before you go into the millennium. So for me, it's just let it flow. Just let it read what it says and put it around Jesus's template. Once you do that, everything sort of makes sense.
So you just talked about the millennium. So what millennial view would you consider yourself holding, or do you have your own way of looking at it?
Yeah, so I take it as a millennial view is I would have to ask a question first. Are you talking about the timing of the rapture or when the millennium happens?
Well, let's start with the timing of the rapture, and then we can get into the other. Yeah, that would be Yeah,
because I think the millennium, from my view, happens after the last 7 years, right? And as
right.
So, well, my personal position is I hope and I pray for a pre-trib rapture. My research says otherwise. So I would be placing the rapture for my research just after the midpoint of the last 7 years. So after the abomination, before the time of trial, which is talked about in early on in Revelation. Time of temptation is how the King James Version lays it out. And that's the same hour that is described in Revelation 14, where it's going to have the summary for the last 3.5 years, starting at about verse 8 or 9. And the hour of the destruction of Babylon. You also have at that same time frame this hour in Revelation 17 where the 10 kings are going to hand their power over to Antichrist to come to power, who destroys Babylon in Revelation 17. And it's also the hour of destruction described in Revelation 18 for the destruction of Babylon. And we're told to come out of Babylon. So it's after the abomination, after you come out of Babylon, but before the temptation. And what that temptation is, or that trial, is it is, I think, the mark of the beast in this particular narrative of the rapture, because the deception will be so great, as Jesus talks about in Matthew 24, that even the elect would be deceived. So that's the trial that we're going to be saved from. And then when you understand that the only other thing that we're promised in terms of the timing, other than nobody knows, not even the Son, of the exact time, is that we're going to be saved from the wrath of God. Which is, you have the wrath bowls, you have the trumpets, you have the seals. So the wrath bowls is the wrath of God being poured out. The wrath is only for non-believers. It's not for believers. And the wrath of God, as you match that up in the Old Testament, is the year of the Lord's wrath. And the day of the Lord's wrath, the day of the Lord's vengeance. And just before the year of favor, which is the time of the Exodus. So you have in the last 3.5 years, you have a whole year of revenge and things being poured out of a cup, as it's talked about in the Old Testament, which is a vessel like the bowls. And you have the year of the Exodus and the reconciliation of Judah and Israel, and as part of the resurrection of Ezekiel 37 of the dry bones, and to be judged, and link in Daniel 12 into that, and also in the time of Jacob's trouble. I'm going to come back to that in a second, which is the Hebrew word Sarah. And then you have in the teens in Ezekiel 37, you have the second Exodus being mentioned, and the uniting back into one staff with King David and Jehovah. And Ezekiel 38 and 39, after this is the Gog War of just before the midpoint of the last 7 years, after the burial of that army in Ezekiel 39, you have the second Exodus again. So after that, and I place it in the time of Jacob's trouble. And you look at Jeremiah 37, and it's talking about the second Exodus and the destruction that they're going to be saved of. And as the book of Micah talks about in chapter 5 and chapter 2, Israel is going to be broken out of the prisons by their breaker and led by not only David, but also their Lord Jehovah. So you have those 2 years, but we're told, and that we're going to be saved from the wrath, just as the reconciliation and the judgment of Israel, they're saved from the wrath. But that happens after rapture. And so in Hosea 9:7, you get the days of Jesus's visitations. And just as in the book of Luke, you get the days of the Son of Man. There's multiple days that he's coming back for rapture, Exodus, and for Armageddon. And once we start to understand that, it starts to really line up with the chronology of Jesus again in Matthew 24. But we're told that we're going to be saved from the wrath, and we're told that in several passages. But we're told that we should expect tribulation as well. And so in the New Testament, you have wrath being coming from two different words, orge and thumas. And they're used interchangeably, and sometimes they might say vengeance, and one says wrath. They're sort of used interchangeably. But it's a distinctly different word than what tribulation comes from, which is the Greek word thalipsis. And so, again, we're told in the New Testament that we should expect tribulation.
Right.
And that in Revelation 2:10, you get 10 days of tribulation, which is suggesting more than 7 years. But I think it's referring to the rise of Babylon there. I won't go into a long oration on how I got there, but understand that they're talking about days as in days of the week, which would be 10 years of tribulation. And Babylon has the blood of the saints on her. So in the rise of Babylon, and then in the first 3.5 years, and then you get the Great Tribulation, not seen since the beginning of the world. Again, Greek word thlipses, that is being talked about in Matthew 24:21, and again a little bit later, a couple of verses later in the book of Matthew. So we see in the book of Revelation in chapter 6 that the saints who have been resurrected are told to wait a little bit longer for those who are going to be martyred for the testimony of Jesus like they were. So this is part of the first fruits. And Jesus talked about, or Paul talked about, the resurrection sequence of Christ, the first fruits. And then when he comes, those who are asleep in him and those who are still alive. So factor that in now that they're going to wait for these saints that are going to be martyred in Revelation 7. And they're martyred for the same reason. And they come out of the Great Tribulation. That's the Greek word thlipses. Now in Matthew 24, Jesus talks about this great affliction that's going to happen. Not great, but you're going to be afflicted. And that they're going to kill you. And you have in Luke and Mark, they're adding to the detail on this in terms of the Holy Spirit and the Holy Ghost providing wisdom to testify to Jesus in this period before the abomination, and part of the signs of the oration that Jesus is giving right after the birthing sorrows. And so this is the Greek word thlipses, the same word that is part of the Great Tribulation in Matthew 24:21. And what's interesting is in Mark's account of Matthew 24:21 and Mark 13:19, it talks about, again, this great destruction not seen since the beginning of the world. Only doesn't use the word tribulation there. It uses the word affliction, which is the Greek word thlipses, which is used for tribulation in Matthew 24:21 in its parallel accounting. So the translators haven't been exactly clear on the translation of tribulation for us to make it easier. And so you also get tribulation in Matthew 24:29, again, talking about tribulation in the Greek word thlipses, and it's the same as in Matthew 13:24. But it's that sort of interchanging of the word of the translators that gets confusing. So when you line that up, we're going to have tribulation and we're going to have Babylon persecute us during the rise and up to the time of the abomination and before the start of the Great Tribulation, which is the same word that's would be the cognate word for the time of Jacob's trouble, Sarah, of the Old Testament, and the time not seen since the beginning of creation. And it's the time of the second Exodus, and it's the time and the same word in Daniel 12:1 when Michael stands at the time of the war in heaven, as it matches up to Revelation 12. And this is the time of the judgment of Israel, some to everlasting life and some to judgment. That is at the midpoint of the last 7 years, and that time of trouble is the Hebrew word Sarah again. So the language and everything just fits if you let it. And so just after the abomination, after Babylon is destroyed, but just before the mark of the beast is when we're going to be saved from the time of temptation. And that happens before the wrath bowls in the last year, and then you have the balance of the bride being reconciled with awakened Israel by the 144,000, part of the first fruits. They're called first fruits in Revelation 14. They're depicted in heaven, so the inference is that these first fruits would have been martyred as being called first fruits as part of the first fruits resurrection. And then you get the summary of the last 3.5 years, starting with the fall of Babylon. In about 14:8 or 14:9. So I know that was a bit of a long rabbit tail. I could go on for a lot longer, but that's how I fit everything together.
So mid-trib, would that characterize your
Just after.
was that
Just
yeah,
after.
just after. Okay.
Yeah, I like how you draw the distinction between tribulation and God's wrath. That's important. I think. I
It
think a
is.
lot of systems conflate the two of those.
Yeah, we're told we're going to go through tribulation. We're told we're not going to go through the wrath. And another interesting piece that matches up here is that it says in Matthew 24 that before the abomination, first the gospel has to be preached to the end of the world, right?
Hmm.
And then the end will come, which is very important because that's that great end time 3.5 years. That's that great tribulation that leads to the wrath bowls and Armageddon. And that you have the two witnesses that are going to preach for the first 3.5 years, as Revelation 11 tells us. And then you have the 144,000 that show up at the beginning of the last 7 years, as Daniel 9 lays out for that time frame, and the time frame that you get for the preaching of the two witnesses, because after that you have the trampling of Jerusalem for 3.5 years. So you have the 7 years there, and Antichrist rules in Revelation 13 for 3.5 years, because he's the one who does the trampling there and sets up the abomination. And that 144,000 are shown right at the end of the midpoint, before you get the summary and then the details of the last 3.5 years of the major events in Revelation 15 through 19. And you have the preaching of this gospel by the 144,000, and you have the preaching of the gospel and prophecies by the two witnesses for the first 3.5 years. And then just before the summary, you get the angel flying in the air that preaches the gospel to the whole earth. And then you get the summary of the last 3.5 years that leads to the wrath bowls.
Hmm.
I really like how you start with like you said, Jesus. With all this, you start with Jesus. You start with the Gospels. You start
Yeah.
with like the what was it? The early church fathers used to say that in the Old Testament Jesus was concealed, in the New Testament Jesus is revealed. Well, we should start with the revelation before we go into the concealed part. And I've seen often with people with their eschatological views, they start with the Old Testament instead of starting with the New. And it makes more sense because Jesus is the foundation. He's the rock that we build all these other, all the other. It makes all the other prophecies, particularly in in the unknown places that people don't tend to look, like Ezekiel and all that kind of stuff. They'll focus on Daniel, and they'll focus on a few Old Testament
Yep.
books, but they won't include the whole gambit of all the prophetic, like you said, for Judah, for the lost tribes of
Yep.
Israel, for
Yep.
all that. Yeah, yeah.
It's
I
all got
see.
to
I
be
see
sort of.
your. I
It's
see
all
your
got to
picture.
fit.
I see the picture.
Yep.
Yeah, I see the picture you're
Yeah. And
painting.
so
Yeah.
let's say,
Yep.
yeah. So if you want to overlay what Daniel's talking about, it fits perfectly on Jesus's chronology in all of the Daniel 2, 7, 8, 9, 11, and 12. It just fits perfectly, and Revelation fits into both perfectly. So, as another example, you can take 2 Thessalonians, where Jesus comes after the falling away, an apostasia. Uh, it is, a defection, a great defection of the time, just as Babylon is going to seduce Christians like crazy away from God. And
Yeah.
then after that, the son of perdition is revealed, who is going to exalt himself in the temple. And so, when you're going to be offended, as the word is talked about in Matthew 24, that's the word scandalizo, means to seduce away. So you have to sort of dig a little bit deeper, but when you dig deeper, you just find things just fit more. So that's the apostasy that's going to be taking place. And the son of perdition has to be revealed before Jesus comes back. And of course, you have the revealing in the abomination, and then you get a sign that is in the second half. And at that sign, he's going to send his angels to gather the elect. And you just have to, the easiest way to say it is just sort of let it flow. And in that last half, not only do you have resurrection sequence, but you also have that will have been completed. You have the rapture, and then you have the final gathering as what is being talked about in the second Exodus with the gathering of the elect. So you have Judah that flees to the wilderness, and Israel from around the world will be broken out of their prisons who have awakened. Judah is around the world. They're going to be led by Jesus and led by King David, and expect the 7 shepherds of Micah as well are going to lead them back to the wilderness to have all of this happen. And that's, after the rapture. So, yeah, I probably talked enough about that unless you have some more questions on more things that we could overlay, but it's just as examples as how easily it sort of fits. So, and if you use
Yeah.
markers like
Yeah.
trumpets and things like that and the archangels, it just fits with the other passages as well.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't want to disclose your whole book. I want people to read your book and buy your book. So yeah, well, I do have a few more questions that I'd like to ask. I don't know how long this one would be or how deep it is, but this is kind of a speculatory. I know you're big on, and I agree with this that you're contrarian. You want the, and because I tend to be too, but how, just to speculate, how pervasive do you think that the Nephilim bloodlines are in the human race today, and what part does that play in the end time scheme?
Well, we certainly get the great and mighty men of the end time, as the book of Revelation talks about, Megas and Megastanes, and that these are the princes, these are the kings, and these are the oligarchs, and they're the ones that are fornicating with Babylon in the first 3.5 years, and then give their power to Antichrist.
Hmm.
When we have a testament in Greek and a testament that's in Hebrew, you don't get that perfect sort of bridge to the exact same words. I mean, you would like to have Gibor, or you would like to have, you know, Rafa or something like that, that you've got these sort of direct connections. But you have to sort of look for the cognate words. And so when you take those words back to Megas and Megastranes, you're talking about something that's big and large as part of its description. But they're also the royals. So if you look at what happens both before and after the flood, you have an organizational structure that usurps the world. You have a mystical religion, and you have Nephilim kings before the flood. After the flood, you have that same archetypical setup with the Noahites, with Nimrod taking over as an archetypical Antichrist type figure at Babel, which is the root word for Babylon, as it comes out of the Greek New Testament. And um, you have an Antichrist type figure in Nimrod that's doing this. And so after the flood, you're going to have the same organizational structure that is set up before the flood. So that includes the royal bloodlines who are ruling, that are Nephilim and Nephilim, or Rephaim and Rephaim hybrid bloodlines, and you have this Babel and daughter of Babel religions as part of the beast empires and part of all of the nations that set up a hierarchy of the noble elite ruling the upper class. So they control the education, they control the priesthood, they control the culture, they control the money, they control the army, they control education, they control everything. And then you're left with a very small entrepreneurial blacksmith, baker, tailor type of class, and then a slave class. So you have 4 classic um, classes that come out of prehistory. You know it as the feudal system that came out of Europe, but it's the same basis that you see all around the world as that class system that was set up in all cultures and in all continents. And so these bloodline kings continue to populate and control all through our history as the visible spurious offspring of the fallen angels and as the royales. Royale, Al, is Al is a transliteration of El in Hebrew, which is an angel or a god. And
Right.
then you see the word God in the Old Testament, it's going to go back to generally El. Baal would be an example of that transliteration. where you have, Lord God, as the Freemasons like to call Baal. And IL is another transliteration, or ILU is another transliteration, and there's several ones that are used throughout the Middle East that are very similarly spelled. So that Royal is Roy, as in Old French, going back to regal in Latin being king, and to rule or ruler as it goes back to Indo-Aryan, and El, kings of God, Rex Deus, as I call them in the first book, which means kings of God. And so these are the bloodlines that continue to rule today. So you're saying, how prevalent are they? Well, they control all of the secret societies at the top level that control all of the power levers around the world today through their societies. And further, we know that 15% of the population is Rh negative. Now, I don't write about Rh negative in the first book because you sort of need kind of absolute sort of proof, but they track their genealogies. And that's got the word gene in it. So some of the major genes that they're tracking are the LB gens and the Julia gens. Julia gens is the word used for the Italian black nobility that would go back to Julius Caesar, Augustus, through the Senate, back to Romulus and Remus. LB gens has a similar, I won't go through, but you get that it goes back to a specific patriarch. And it's the gene that would produce the blood type. So it's the gene of Albi, or the gene of Julia, or the gene of Isis, that I name a chapter of in the first book, or the fairy gene, or the elven gene. There's a lot of different genes, but it's that specific gene of the gods that's in the DNA that was passed on to them that would produce a specific blood type. So a lot of people will say that Rh negative is missing the D antigen. So how do you add something to something if it's missing something? It's an oxymoron. And so it's not that you're adding that; it's the gene that determines the blood type, and that most of the Royals are Rh negative. The Windsors are O negative, for example, and O negative would be sort of the top of that as the universal blood type that can match with anything. So if you're using that, there's probably a maximum of 15%. But when you're talking about the wealth in the world, of the great wealth, that great 1% of the absolute pure blood is probably fairly representative, and then it sort of gets weaker in terms of the purity of the stock. And they track their genealogies to track their purity, or the grafted in bloodlines. So how powerful are they? Well, they control everything in the background. When I was doing my research for my book in terms of the wealth that they have, their wealth isn't on the books. So when you look at Bill Gates today, or Elon Musk as the richest man, that's a drop in the bucket. When I was doing the research of the wealth market, and this was in, say, 2000 to 2002, in that era, early on in the 2000s, is the estimated wealth off the books at that time was 300 to 500 trillion. You can only imagine what that would be today.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's
man.
that kind of money that can sort of control things. And so it doesn't take a great number with that type of power and wealth from behind the scenes to control things. But I think there's more than what people think that there are of them, but they're more of the diluted bloodlines that'll be part of the sort of upper class and the oligarch class and the new money. So yeah, they're out there, and they are very, very powerful. The Western Europeans have a specific vision for their new world order, but other bloodlines around the world do not agree. And so we're seeing that pushback today.
Yeah.
From other parts of the world.
Like different cabals, so to speak, right?
Yeah, so you have to understand as well, and when you're trying to understand the bloodlines, that there are rivalries there, and that even though they're all working towards the same goal directionally. At the end of the day, whether it's from their belief as the great monarch, as the Europeans might call him, or Lord Maitreya, the Dragon Messiah, or Antichrist, as we would call him, there can only be one ruling family in terms of how they see this playing out. So there's a rivalry as to who would be that family that's going to rule for the 1,000 years that they are promising, whether it was in the Third Reich, or as people now call as the Fourth Reich, or the New Age is another word. That's that millennium that Antichrist will promise, because he has to counterfeit everything that Jesus said, did, and will do. And so, as least as much as he can. And so you have these rivalries that have been going on forever. So you had something called social masonry that was created in the 1800s by the bloodline societies in Europe. And that understand the 13 families are only the Western families. There's bloodlines from all around the world that would have similar organizational structures set up around the world. So they created social masonry, and they educated people like Trotsky and Lenin in it, and other people. And they created something called communism, and they launched that communism on a rival, a pure blood Scythian bloodline that was originated in Kiev. The Putyanin, who produced a junior offshoot after setting up the Moscow dynasty that became in about the 1600s as the junior offshoot, just as the Plantagenet are a junior offshoot of the Anjou, part of the same house, but a scioning in, which is a grafting in. You have the Romanovs. So they are Putyanin, but they're named Romanovs. Well, this was still classified as a more pure original bloodline than the migrated bloodlines that came out of the Middle East. And so they were a little bit offside on how things would play out. And so they put communism on the Russian bloodline and destroyed almost all of the Russian bloodline. Then they created National Socialism to take care of communism that got out of control. And of course, that destroyed the Kaiser bloodline and eventually reduced the Habsburg, as part of that alliance, bloodline down to a lower level of power. Then they launched that bloodline, that virus on China. The original dragon creator gods created the Xia dynasty, that's spelled Xia, and the western part of the Xia dynasty was spelled Xi. And typically that will show up as the first part of a name, which is the last name in China. And we now have a bloodline fellow who's descended from the Xia dynasties by the name of Xi. Xi is how it's spelled. And he has a whole different opinion as what Putin does, who believes he is the illegitimate son of his grandfather or great grandfather out of Kiev, who was born through an out of marriage of one of the Putyanins, and they didn't provide the whole name in their tradition. And so he believes he's legitimate heir to the Putyanin dynasty and is trying to take Kiev back. We have bloodlines all over the world, and as we go through the sorrows and the wars and rumors of wars that's going to lead to the false prophets, that's going to lead to Babylon, we're going to see wars that are going to be going on that is going to make way for the old bloodlines to come back to power. So we have 10 kings, as Daniel 2 talks about, Daniel 7 talk about, Revelation 12, 13, and 17.
Oh, wow. Yep. That makes sense. Yep. Yeah. Wow. I'm overwhelmed with all the information.
Yeah,
That's incredible
I
stuff.
filled up several pages of my yellow pad here.
So, yeah, it's kind of getting late in the show here, but I want you to kind of tell us about your new book, not the content, but to tell us about the new book and where it is and when it's coming out and process and all that kind of stuff, if you will, for us.
Yeah, so we have the cover design that's out. I'm editing the editor on the last section 7, as we speak, and looking for August or September release, depending on how fast we can get it into the publishing queue. It is called the Genesis
Yay.
6 Conspiracy Part 2, how understanding prehistory and prophecy helps to define end time prophecy. And so this book is, I said I would never write a sequel to the Genesis 6 because I didn't want to be redundant, but over the years that the book has been published and the shows that I've done and the social media and the emails and everything I get, what I've learned is that people want way more information that is being taught in the churches, and they want to be taught about the whole Bible, which includes prehistory and prophecy. And so I decided to write a book, but I wanted to write it in a way that would be redundant of the first book, because there's, particularly in polytheism and secret societies, you can go on forever. So this book is targeted directly at Christians, as opposed to the first book that is designed to hopefully get people to have a look at what's in the Bible, as well as targeted at Christians as well, to maybe dig a little deeper into the Bible. This one is targeted at Christians, and it goes into how much information is in the Old Testament about giants, hybrid giants, walks through all of the giant wars after the flood, including the Exodus, defines all of those giants and those hybrid nations that are talked about within the Bible, gets into the angelic order, both loyal and rebellious, and also brings out words and understanding that you need to understand end time prophecy. And then I start linking that into end time prophecy, and then start laying down end time chronology in a way that makes sense, and in a way that I've laid out earlier. And I also, in the preface, talk about my approach, and I give 10 basic guidelines that I use and to try and discipline and keep me on track.
Wow. I can't wait. I'm so excited for it to come out. There's a question we ask most people on our show, usually at the end, and I'm just curious to hear what you have to say. Is what is the most supernatural experience that you ever had since being a Christian?
Well, I can't say I've had something like a vision. I have not had that. I don't claim to be a prophet. I don't claim to be a minister. I don't claim to be a disciple. I'm a researcher. So when I get sort of asked that question, I like to be sort of very, very, very humble about things. And there are things that can happen to you in life. There's lots of little things that you sort of can't sort of necessarily explain, like when I was doing research for my book and I couldn't find a book. In fact, several occasions where inexplicably it would be just there. And so one of the books I was looking for, because I wanted to get information into the first book about the Kishimaya, and I wanted to get a copy of the Popol Vuh. And it was out of publication, and you just can't get it. And people tried to get it for me. They thought they could. Nobody could get it for me. And so I thought, well, it just won't be part of the book. And towards the end of the research on the book, I went on a vacation, and we were on a cruise, and we stopped at the Maya Riviera. And my wife and I, we went into the downtown and have a look at area, around the downtown area. And it was very hot, and she needed some water. And she says, I need to get some water. And she sees this rundown little store, and it's just like a long little closet store. And as soon as I walk in the door, I know I have to go to the back of the store. And at the back of the store, they have a few books. And there's the Popol Vuh. I grab it, and I bought it, and I put it in the book.
Wow.
But
That's
are
amazing.
odd little things that would happen that way. Yeah. But when I was quite young and I
Serendipitous
was
stuff.
16, yeah, the most powerful one that is most inexplicable is, and I grew up in northern Saskatchewan, who had gone and taken my sister back to Edmonton, and we just got me and my brother, were twins, just had gotten our driver's licenses, and we're driving back in April, and you can get really bad storms and ice and black ice up in Canada. And I was driving, and the car was just absolutely out of control, going 60 or 70 miles an hour. Semi's coming right at us on a head on, and I'm trying to weave out of the way, and we go spinning out of control into the ditch, and then we came out of the ditch, and I continued to drive, and my brother turned to me and said, "How did you do that?" I said, "I didn't do
Oh, wow.
it."
That's
Yeah.
amazing. That's
And I just
amazing.
look at it that if that hadn't happened, then I don't do what I do today. Obviously, I think we would have been killed.
Mm.
That's amazing. When you're interviewed like this, are there ever any kind of questions that you wish you would be asked? I mean, no is a good answer for this. You don't have to have one. But are there ever any that you wished an interviewer would ask you about, or something they would ask you about?
I do so many shows that I think they've probably all been
Yeah.
asked. The questions, the questions that I would encourage people to ask me on a show is what are the things your audience are most interested in the Bible or research that I do, and ask those questions, because what I want to do is I want to help people to connect the dots, and I want to encourage them to make sense of the Bible and of this world, and to dig a little deeper and then help other people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's obvious that's your ministry, and you're doing a superb job of it. I mean, this book is incredible, and I haven't finished yet. I'm going through it, and I can't wait for the next one to come out where I can dig into it too, and just that. But it and also, your ministry of being on people's shows and podcasts. I mean, I've listened to, like, and I know Lindsay has. We've listened to several different podcasts, and I think that yeah, you're doing a great job of putting it all out there, and people are getting it, and what one podcast might miss, another one will get, and vice versa. So yeah, and I think it's vital, Gary, for us to know this, because I mean, I don't like to speculate, but I do believe, particularly since the past like 5 or 6 years, that the end times are quickly upon us. And I don't want to get you to speculate, or and if you want to comment on that, you can. But I do. There's this sense. I mean, I'm almost 50, and I've seen, even in my lifetime, that just this. I feel this urgency that I haven't felt for years of being a Christian for 30 years, and I don't know,
Yeah.
how would you respond to that?
Well, I do think we're in the fig tree generation. Um, and if we are, we're still in the sorrows. I try and encourage people not to get ahead of prophetic chronology. So you
Hmm.
hear all the time that people say this person's antichrist or that person's antichrist. Well, we have a
Yeah.
ways to go. There's things that haven't been done yet. Or people will say, well, rapture's coming tomorrow, or Revelation 12 sign has been here. That's the rapture one that was large a few number of years ago. And I said, no, that's astrology. That's not it. Believe me, the sign is not going to be an astrology sign. Um, so we want to get ahead, and there are stumbling blocks. Like, we don't have world government yet. We see it on the horizon. We don't have a universal religion. We see endeavors to bring that about. We don't have the people of Judah sacrificing on the wing of the temple yet. None of that's
Hmm.
happened yet. So we have events yet to be fulfilled in those 3.5 years, and in the fig tree generation that's to come. So the reason why I think we might be in the fig tree generation is that you have, in end time prophecy, the southern kingdom back in their land. And so, but more importantly, they're back in control of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is kind of the epicenter of events for end time prophecy. And
Yeah.
so that's
Yeah.
a critical piece. I look at Jesus before he went to the temple, before he presented the end time oration to answer the questions of the disciples of the signs of the end time and his second coming, that he killed a fig tree because its fruit was no longer valid, was bare. And then when you understand old time prophecy and allegorically and prophetic allegory, the northern kingdom is referenced as the vine and the southern kingdom is referenced as the fig tree. And then Jesus uses the fig tree allegory after killing the fig tree. And when you see this fig tree bloom again, this is the time. This and in this generation, everything that he says will be fulfilled. Heaven and earth will pass away, but his words will not pass away.
Mm.
So we can't reinvent what he says. There's this one specific generation, and he calls it the fig tree generation. And we don't know how long a generation is. In Exodus, it's 40
true.
years, and Psalms, it's 70 years, and Genesis 6:3 actually says 120 years. Now, it doesn't have to be a full generation, but I think we're in that fig tree generation, and one of those would be 70 years from 1967, taking of Jerusalem, and that would put us into that Messianic period of somewhere in the 2030s, but it could be longer. So we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. And so the wars and the rumors of wars are something that we have to be understanding of, but there's also the earthquakes, which are also increasing, and there's also pestilence, and there's also famine. They're going to work together, and I think these are contrived catastrophes, and they're going to get stronger as we go through the fig tree generation. And these calamities are going to lead to the false prophets, lead to Babylon, lead to universal religion and the world government. And by the time of the seal openings, Babylon will be in power. One presumes the 10 kings will be subservient to her at that point in time or shortly thereafter. And that in Revelation 6, after the seal openings, we're going to get 25% destruction of the world, of the people, of everything. So they get stronger.
Wow.
And I think even before that, people are going to say some of these wars that the false prophets are going to predict, I think that they're going to predict, is going to look like Armageddon. So people are going to falsely say, this is it. And then we're going to get to the Revelation. And then people are going to say, that's Armageddon. And even in Revelation 6, you have these princes and these royal bloodlines that are talked about. And I didn't finish what I was saying earlier, but in Ezekiel 38 and 39, you get these kings slaughtered in that war just before the midpoint, and also in Revelation 19, and also in Joel 1 and 2, which is Ezekiel 38 and 9 war, and Revelation and Ezekiel 38, 39, Revelation 9, and Joel 1 and 2, you have these mighty men, these Gibor, that are part of that war in the last 7 years, first half, just before the midpoint. And then you get Gibor again that are in Joel 3 that are also part of the Armageddon war. And in Ezekiel 39, with that war just before the midpoint, you've got these mighty ones again. These are the Gibor, and you also have the travelers, which is another rabbit hole I won't go down today. But you sort of get that imagery that these wars are going to continue to happen, and then they get stronger to the point of 25% destruction. And then in the trumpet judgments, with the timing of the Revelation 9 war, Joel 1 and 2, Ezekiel 38 and 9, it's 33% destruction. And in Revelation 6, you have the kings in that set of wars are going into the caves and saying, it's the time of the Lord, right? It's the time of Armageddon. And so even some of them are going to be deceived. And you're going to see this war that is so large in Ezekiel 38 and 39, Joel 1 and 2, Revelation 9, that it will become the counterfeit Armageddon for Antichrist to take credit for winning. And then he marches his armies into Jerusalem, as Daniel 11 and Luke 21 talk about, and sets up the abomination. And you still haven't gotten Armageddon yet, which would be 100% destruction, lest Jesus stepped in because no flesh would be saved. And so
Mm.
we have to
Yeah.
be careful of of the tribulations that we're going to be going through, because they get stronger throughout the fig tree generation, just as the sorrows get stronger. And they're the exact same catastrophes that are described in the sorrows as in the seals and in the trumpets and in the wrath bowls.
Wow.
Mm.
Yep. Yep, that answers that. That's yeah.
So people wonder, how could the elect be deceived? We're going to see things we have not seen before, and we're going to see a lot of things that are going to look like Armageddon.
Mm.
Yeah, and then as each one comes, it's going to be like the boy who cried wolf. Is this the real one? Is this the real one? And then
Yes.
the real one we're going to know. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's
Just as
great.
the
Yeah,
book
I
of Peter
guess if they
says.
were
Yeah, yep.
saying boy that cried wolf when Peter was still alive, I mean, it won't get any better by the time of that
Well, and
generation, I guess.
consider this, that Antichrist needs a counterfeit Antichrist that he can claim he defeated.
Oh, wow.
So that's why Jesus warned us there'd be multiple Antichrists.
That's interesting.
Well, I wonder if that relates to the beast turning on the harlot. I mean, that's got to happen too. However that
Yeah,
plays
it does. It does. And that's that hour of trial where they hand their power over to Antichrist to destroy Babylon so that he can set up his new religion that Daniel 11 talks about. And in Revelation 13. So where the false prophet, creates the image and he starts the reign. So yeah, so you've got those 10 kings, and he overthrows three of those kings as well. So I think the one that rises to Antichrist like would be Gog, chief prince of Gog of Magog, chief prince of Meshech. And what's interesting about Gog is that he doesn't show up in the table of nations like Magog does. Gog actually comes out of nowhere and is defined as a both in Greek and in the Old Testament as being an end time Antichrist type figure. Now Gog, out of polytheism, was the offspring of a parent god named Iapetus in the Greek mythology, as was Magog and Albion. I think one of the tribes of Japheth was named after one of those giants, Magog. And so you're going to have this release of the abyss in Revelation 9, just before that Revelation 9 war. And I think that you're going to see the release of fallen angels that are coming out. I think you're going to see the release of the demons that are locked in the sides of the abyss that Ezekiel 32 and Isaiah 14 talk about, the terrible ones, did terrible things while on earth, and were sent and are speaking to Pharaoh in that very obscure prophecy that I also talk about in the new book, that I think are going to be part of this war that's going to look like Armageddon. And, understand that Antichrist, false prophet, and Satan at the time of Armageddon, they actually have these demons come out of their mouths to do miracles to gather the kings for Armageddon. So you could translate that as not as coming out of the mouth, that they actually command those demons, and that the demons will be working to possess or have an oiketerion, a dwelling place for the spirit, comes from habitation and house in heaven, Jude 1:6, and First Corinthians, First Corinthians 5:2. Could be 2 Corinthians 5:2. Anyways, people want to get a hold of me, I can send you that passage. And that I think they're going to be creating through the technology abilities for these things to either take possession of a clone body, some sort of chimera body that they might be developing, which starts to answer some of the questions about these crazy creatures that are in the Revelation 9 war. and or
Yeah.
they're going to be possessing the kings that are ruling the world at that time as well. And in the occult system, they like to invite these demons in because they think they can add more power, but I think it's just the demon that takes control. So they're just not fighting back. Whereas we see in demon possession in the New Testament, there's a struggle going on between the host and the demon spirit. I think this demon spirit is coming in on behest and invited in by these kings that will give them more power. So I think there's a connection in there as well. So we have to be aware of for the end time.
Yep.
And if people are wondering or not familiar with the topic, the disembodied spirits of the giants don't go to sleep. So biblically, we're told hundreds of times in the Bible that when we die, we sleep, and that the soul and the body is of this earth, and our spirit goes back to heaven, and that there's those three components. So it's the soul and the body. That's that dwelling place in the physical world for a spirit to interact physically. So demons need a physical body to interact with, or some other substitute kind of oikoterion, like the teraphim, as they're talked about as walking or talking idols in the Old Testament, to hold that spirit. So it's a concept that's really important to understand, that there's a dwelling place that fallen angels also created for themselves, which was a soul and body where their spirit merged into, so that they could procreate and pass on the DNA to create the giants. So it's all interconnected. I have a great document for people if they want it on soul, body, and spirit, and just sort of walks you through that scripturally.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, if people want to reach out to you and they want to connect, what are the best ways for them to do that? I'm gonna put the details in the show notes, but let's just kind of get them,
Yep.
all the things
best-
you have available.
The best way to get a hold of me, if you want a document on a certain topic that I might have mentioned on the show, or you want to ask whether I have a document on a subject I didn't, if I have it, I will send it to you at no charge. If you just want to ask a question, I'll answer your question. It might take me 6 weeks to get back to you, but I will get back to you. And the best way to get a hold of me is through my website at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6, the number 6conspiracy.com. And if you forget that, you can go to my media page on my website, where it says contact Gary Wayne for an interview. If you click on that, that's my website email. It will come through to me.
Okay, great. That's awesome. Well, Gary, thank you so much for being on our show today. I appreciate it. I mean, I'm still reeling and overwhelmed with all the stuff, and I can't wait to read your new book, and I'm anxious for it to come out. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you, man.
Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.